Well, let's move to what's happening in Latin America. And I'll note after our next guest, we will be hearing from Dr. Mohammed Salmiya, who is the director of Al Shifa Hospital. So stick with us here. We will be hearing from the director general of Al Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. But next, we want to go to another area where a lot has been happening geopolitically on this issue, Latin America, as I mentioned. Zoe Alexandra, journalist and co-editor of People's Dispatch, is back with us. Zoe, as always, thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, it's an honor to have you here, as it always is. And, we're seeing actually a fair amount in Latin America from my perspective, countries breaking ties, we're calling ambassadors, big protests. Give us a capsule view, if you could, of what we're seeing in that regard.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Latin America may be geographically far from the region, but there is a huge impact in what's been happening. As you mentioned, there have been mass protests on the streets this past weekend on the International Day of Action and Solidarity called for by the International People's Assembly. We saw mass mobilizations in Sao Paulo, Brazil, in dozens of other cities across Brazil, in Bogota, Colombia, in Mexico City, many other cities across the region. But also, as we've spoken about many times on this show, Latin America is currently in a moment where we have a record number of progressive governments in the region. As we know, progressive does not necessarily mean progressive or good on Palestine, as I think a lot of the U.S. so-called progressives have proven to us. However, it is one of the regions that has had the most perhaps dynamic response to what has been happening in terms of cutting ties. We saw Bolivia in the end of October announced that they were cutting ties once again with Israel. These ties had been resumed under Jeanine Áñez when she took over in the coup. Previously, Evo had cut ties with Israel. Countries like Colombia, Chile, and Honduras have recalled their diplomatic personnel from Israel. Again, this isn't taking the step of fully cutting ties, but it is a clear sign. And leaders like Gustavo Petro, he's been probably one of the most outspoken leaders in the entire world in terms of what has been happening, posting day after day, condemning the genocide, condemning the killing of kids, condemning the position also of Israel to attack anyone who's condemning what's happening and calling it anti-Semitism. He himself has faced very, very, very difficult diplomatic blowback from the U.S., its allies, and Israel over his position in support of the Palestinian cause. Of course, we know Gustavo Petro's support of Palestine did not start now in October. He's historically understood the importance of a free Palestine and the struggle against Zionism and imperialism. But again, a really crucial voice at this point. He's no longer just a left leader or a mayor. He's actually a president and one of the most respected voices on the world stage when it comes to issues of human rights, of the environment, and many other things. So his support has definitely been crucial. And so I think this diplomatic pressure from Latin America, although it's not the global north, which is truly the lifeblood of the Zionist project, it still has been crucial in even mobilizing its own citizens. I remember I was speaking to progressive activists in Colombia, and they said, we've never been so proud of our president, and we're going to take the streets and defend this position that he has so boldly taken. So I think we're seeing not only people's movements mobilizing in support of Palestine, but also seeing that when their leaders take these bold stands, they have also taken to the streets. And of course, I would be remiss to not mention Venezuela and Cuba, who didn't have to cut ties because they really don't have many relations. And they have, of course, been condemning what has been happening. Maduro has met many times over the past couple of weeks with the Palestinian ambassador. What you're seeing is a video from Miguel Diaz-Canel condemning what has been happening, condemning the genocide of Palestinians and saying it is not a question, it is not a political question. This is a question of humanity. This is a question of standing up for the oppressed. This is a question of defending all of our humanity, because if we stay silent in the face of genocide, then what humanity exists if that's what if that's what the bar is. So I think Latin America has definitely taken an important stand. Of course, we've also seen similar positions taken by South Africa in this realm as well. But I think this has been an interesting moment in Latin America.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So really interesting here is that Israel has historically played an interesting role in Latin America. And it's much like South Africa, it's not a nice role. Israel has historically been aligned with a lot of the fascist dictatorships that the US has supported and many times supported in overthrowing leftist leaders in the past. And Israel's relationship with Colombia, for example, before it was very much it's a military relationship. Back when Colombia was run by right wingers before Gustavo Petro, they often bragged that they were the Israel of Latin America. But I'm curious if you could just maybe briefly walk us through some of that history and maybe why some of these left-leaning leaders in Latin America might not have a great affinity for Israel.
Well, this is definitely the case with Colombia. Gustavo Petro, in a lot of his tweets, has actually mentioned the role that Israeli military has played in the internal armed conflict in Colombia. Yair Klein is an infamous name in the Colombian left. He's someone who trained paramilitaries in Colombia to kill leftists, to carry out genocide within Colombia itself. And in addition to that, there were also formal military partnerships between Israel, United States, and Colombia, as we see in the U.S. when dozens and dozens of police departments go to get trainings in Israel, have these sort of technical and skills partnerships. This also happens in Latin America and on a military level. So in Colombia, there has been a lot of noise about the fact that, both extra-officially with paramilitaries, but also this military cooperation has taken place. The Colombian military is responsible for war crimes in their country, for disappearing thousands of people. And of course, there was Colombian military cooperation with Israel and the United States during the infamous false positive scandal in the 2000s when over 6,000 people were assassinated and dressed up as guerrilla combatants. What's interesting is that throughout all of this time, Gustavo Petro has been drawing this direct parallel between the war against the Colombian people carried out by paramilitaries, by the army, the war against the left there, and what's happening in Gaza. And he said many times that in the entirety, for example, of this period of Alvaro Uribe, not even a fraction of the kids that have been killed in the past month in Gaza were killed, and that the amount of civilians that have been killed in the internal armed conflict in Colombia is not comparable to what's been happening in the past month. I think he feels this extremely deeply. He knows what it's like to go through a war and internal conflict, and that's why people are having this emotional reaction to seeing crimes that have been committed in their land, committed there. And I think we've seen this again with the solidarity of people's movements and people across the world, that seeing these atrocities, especially if you have experienced similar ones, is really just moves people to act and moves people to speak out.
No, absolutely. It's a crucial point. And I just want to interject here. Al Jazeera now reporting that Al Nasser Children's Hospital in Gaza City attacked twice today, almost forced to fully stop operating. So that's new news that's just coming out there from Al Jazeera. But, one of the issues, Zoe, that, is so significant in the propaganda, of course, of Israel is how Hamas, Hezbollah, whoever is operating all around Latin America. I mean, this is a big talking point for the Republican Party in the United States, that they have these cells everywhere. We've seen this incident that's happened in Brazil. There's not a lot of clarity around the incident, I know now, but I'm hoping you can at least bring us up to speed with what we do know, that allegedly Brazil and Israel foiled some sort of, so-called terrorist plot by Hezbollah, but it seems that the Brazilian government is not exactly on board with the Israeli narrative about that. I know it's a developing story, but what is going on here?
Well, the case of Brazil is quite interesting. What's going on right now, the impact that this has had in national politics, but also their diplomatic relations. Currently, I'll just kind of give an overview of the situation, because this case with the investigation allegedly of a Hezbollah group within Brazil and this investigation is also tied to these other elements, which is the fact that there are 34 Brazilians inside of Gaza who worked there, maybe worked in hospitals, aid workers, who have not been allowed to leave. Israel is not allowing them to leave. A Brazilian reporter said that they're actually diplomatic hostages of the Israeli government because essentially they are saying that other countries' citizens have been allowed to leave, and those countries just happen to be allies of Israel. And so right now, Lula and his foreign ministry have been working extremely hard to try to get these Brazilians out of Gaza, of course, this war zone, and they are facing huge roadblocks. Israel says, well, we don't really exactly know why they can't leave, but they can't leave. That's on top of course, this back and forth with trying to pressure Lula to take a stronger stance. They're saying, well, if Lula takes a stronger stance criticizing Palestine, if he stops condemning the killing of kids, if he stops condemning this violence against the Palestinians, well, perhaps they will have a more amenable situation. In addition to that, yesterday, Jair Bolsonaro was reportedly, well, he was at a screening in the Chamber of Deputies of this infamous, essentially IDF propaganda movie. It's about 47 minutes. It's been shown to international journalists across the world. There was a screening this week in New York, in Los Angeles. It's a film that puts together a lot of images to try to essentially shift people's viewpoint on what's happening, trying to show atrocities and say, and this is why you must support Israel. Jair Bolsonaro, former president, currently implicated in many different criminal proceedings, investigations in parliament. The Israeli ambassador met with him in Congress in Brazil, along with dozens of other parliamentarians to watch this film. This has added to this whole undergoing kind of international and national political crisis within Brazil. And as you said, on top of that, there is this investigation. The justice minister has made statements saying that both this investigation had already been underway, but at the same time that it's not something that this is not related to the current events. So it's a really, really complicated situation. And I think maybe some people are wondering, well, why isn't Brazil following in the footsteps of Colombia, of Honduras, and of other countries? And I think maybe this can explain a little, because in Brazil, there's a huge Zionist lobby. And this is not just your typical, maybe related more to Jewish institutions, but actually there's a huge Christian Zionist lobby. When I was in Brazil covering the elections and went to several Bolsonaro rallies, it was like the most Israeli flags I'd ever seen in my life. Except probably in Israel, all over, protesters having a huge amount of support for Israel. It's really, really tied into this evangelical lobby. It's tied into, Bolsonaro has very, very close ties. He went to this screening with the ambassador. So I think the situation in Brazil is quite a complicated one, a complex one. Brazil, Lula has shifted from his original stance, which was a little more condemnatory of what was happening in Palestine and more support to Israel. This has shifted, but it is definitely a dynamic situation in Brazil right now with regards to this siege of Gaza.
Well, Zoe, as always, really appreciate everything you are able to do on a number of different topics. I know at peoplesdispatch.org, you guys are covering just about everything. I never get the time right, but you should go to the People's Dispatch YouTube page at either 10:30 or 11 a.m. tomorrow when Give the People What They Want, co-hosted by Zoe, and VJ will be there. Maybe get there at 10:30 and just get ready if it's technically 11. Fantastic show every single week, breaking down this and many more things. So thanks, as always, Zoe, for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. And that's just an image of protests in Puerto Rico when a protester scaled the flagpole, took down the American flag, and replaced it with a Palestinian flag. I mean, what an image in occupied Puerto Rico, showing the full solidarity for Palestine, anti-colonial struggle united. I think that's just a beautiful way to end it.